participated in the shuttle operations. Moreover, tens of thousands of Ukrainian citizens were able to meet U.S. airmen and, in some cases, establish close personal relations with them. Thus, this story is very much about people, their lives, views, and emotions. The history of the air bases in Ukraine in 1944 to 1945 has a significant literature. The American side is well documented, thanks to the vast array of sources available to scholars in U.S. archives and library collections. 4 well-documented and more or less contemporaneous official histories of Frantic, as the American shuttle-bombing operations were called by the commanders of the U.S. strategic air forces in Europe, each covering a different period of time, have been preserved. The archives of the U.S. Air Force Historical Agency at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama and the documentary collection of the U.S. military mission to Moscow at the National Archives and Records Administration in Maryland, the Averell Harriman Archive at the Library of Congress, and President Roosevelt's papers at the FDR Presidential Library and Museum in Hyde Park, New York, provide rich source material for this account of the bases and those of my predecessors. What makes this account quite unique is the use of previously unavailable sources, files of the Committee for State Security, KGB, and its predecessors, documenting Soviet military counterintelligence and secret police surveillance of Americans and their contacts in the Red Army, Air Force, and the local population. The files begin with the establishment of the bases and continue into the onset and mounting tension of the Cold War from the late 1940s to the early and mid-1950s. The revolution of dignity in Ukraine, which took place in 2013 to 2014, resulted among other things in an archival revolution, the unprecedented opening of former KGB archives, including World War II materials inherited from military counterintelligence. The reports of spies and the memos of their masters and handlers, comprising about 24 thick volumes, have now become available to scholars and the public at large. As the Americans suspected, the Soviets actively spied on their allies, recording not only their actions but also their views. With a level of clarity and precision that few sources can match, the KGB documents describe Soviet attitudes toward American servicemen, the evolution of relations between Soviet and Americans on the Poltava area bases, and the transformation in the guests' attitudes toward their hosts. Taken together, American military records and Soviet counterintelligence reports provide a solid basis for our understanding of the role of politics, ideology, and culture in forging relations between the wartime allies. They leave little doubt that relations deteriorated not only because of the disappearance of the common enemy, or ideological incompatibility, or the change in Soviet and American geopolitical calculations as the war drew to its conclusion. No less important was the experience of these American servicemen, which turned even most of the pro-Soviet among them into committed opponents. The conflict of profoundly different worldviews and values shared by the rank-and-file participants of the Soviet-American encounter undermined the Grand Alliance even before the greater geopolitical reasons for its existence disappeared, reasons that conflict presaged and reflected. With the winds of the new Cold War becoming chillier by the day, we need to look back at how the Grand Alliance played out in those American air bases in Ukraine in 1944 to 1945 and learn from the experience of those who did their best to make it work. One obvious lesson to future generations is that partnerships can be sustained for some time by the need to defeat a common enemy, but no mutual trust and enduring relationship can be established between allies with incompatible visions of the just political order and, at the end, of freedom and tyranny. Prologue. On a warm day in May 1958, a year that inaugurated the crises that led to the construction of the Berlin Wall, a KGB mobile team in Ukraine picked up a subject of surveillance they codenamed Tourist. The man was approximately 35 to 36 years of age, of medium height and on the slim side. He had a slightly elongated face, a large straight nose, and was wearing glasses. The subject was dressed in a greenish shirt and dark grey pants, tight by Soviet standards, which suggested that he was a foreigner. They began to follow Tourist at the exit from the Kiev highway to the city of Poltava in central Ukraine, a couple of dozen miles away from the city. He was driving a Soviet-made Volga sedan. Once in Poltava, Tourist showed particular interest in the Corpus Park, the Poltava Victory Monument, and the local museum and theatre. As one might expect of any tourist, he took pictures of all those places.